Sarah Martinez stepped into the crowded restaurant, her simple jeans and plain white t-shirt making her blend into the busy Friday night crowd. She had driven 3 hours from the naval base to attend her high school reunion, something she had been dreading for weeks. 20 years had passed since graduation, and she wondered if anything had changed in this small coastal town. The reunion was being held at the fanciest restaurant in town, a place that had opened just 5 years ago. Sarah looked around the decorated room, recognizing familiar faces that had aged and changed over the years. Some people looked exactly the same, while others were completely different from their teenage selves. As she made her way to the registration table, she heard a loud, familiar laugh that made her stomach turn. Brad Henderson stood near the bar, surrounded by a group of men who were hanging on his every word. He looked older, but still carried himself with the same arrogance that had made her life miserable in high school. Brad had been the quarterback of the football team, the most popular guy in school, and Sarah's biggest tormentor. He had made fun of her quiet nature, her worn-out clothes, and her dreams of joining the military. While other kids talked about college and careers, Sarah had always known she wanted to serve her country. Well. Brad's voice boomed across the room as he spotted her. Look who decided to show up. Sarah Martinez, the girl who thought she was going to be some kind of soldier. The conversation around him stopped as people turned to look. Sarah felt a familiar weight of their stares, the same feeling she had experienced countless times in the school hallways. She took a deep breath and walked toward the registration table, hoping to avoid confrontation. But Brad was not done. He walked over to her, his expensive suit and shiny watch catching the light. "I heard you actually went through with that crazy military idea," he said with a smirk. "What are you now, some kind of secretary on a base somewhere?" Sarah signed her name on the registration sheet and took her name tag. She had learned long ago that responding to people like Brad only encouraged them. "Something like that," she replied quietly, hoping he would lose interest and move on. "I always knew you would end up in some dead-end job," Brad continued, his voice getting louder to make sure others could hear. "Remember how you used to talk about being special forces or something ridiculous like that? We all knew that was just fantasy talk from a girl who watched too many action movies." More people had gathered around now, some looking uncomfortable, but others seeming to enjoy the show. Sarah recognized many faces from high school, people who had either ignored her or joined in when Brad made fun of her dreams. Lisa Chen, who had been head cheerleader, stepped closer with a fake smile. "Sarah, it's so good to see you," she said in a voice that dripped with false sweetness. "Brad was just telling us about his latest business success. He owns 3 car dealerships now and just bought a mansion by the lake. What have you been up to all these years?" Sarah could feel the trap being set. This was the same dynamic from high school, where Lisa would pretend to be friendly while setting her up for Brad's cruel comments. "I've been serving in the Navy," Sarah answered simply. "The Navy?" Brad laughed loudly. "I bet you've been cleaning ships or filing paperwork for 20 years. Did you ever make it past the bottom rank? What are you, a seaman or something equally unimpressive?" The group around them chuckled and Sarah felt her face flush with embarrassment. She had faced down terrorists in hostile territories, led dangerous missions in some of the world's most challenging environments, and earned the respect of the toughest warriors in the military. But standing here in this restaurant, she felt like the same insecure teenager who had been mocked for her dreams. "Actually," Sarah began, but Brad cut her off. "Let me guess," he said, raising his voice even more. "You spent 20 years taking orders from real leaders, never advancing, never achieving anything significant. Meanwhile, those of us with real talent built successful lives in the real world." The restaurant had grown quieter as more people noticed the commotion. Sarah saw former teachers, classmates, and even some parents of her old friends watching the scene unfold. She felt trapped, just like she had felt in high school when Brad and his friends would corner her in the hallways. Mike Roberts, who had been Brad's best friend and was now clearly still following his lead, joined the conversation. "I remember Sarah always talking about how she was going to be some kind of elite soldier," he said with a grin. "We tried to tell her that girls like her don't make it in that world, but she was too stubborn to listen to reason." "Some people never learn to accept their limitations," Lisa added, examining her perfectly manicured nails. "It's actually kind of sad when you think about it. All those years wasted chasing impossible dreams instead of finding a nice husband and settling down like normal people." Sarah felt her hands clench into fists at her sides. She had trained herself to remain calm under extreme pressure. to think clearly in life or death situations. But these people from her past had a way of getting under her skin like no enemy ever could. "I'm sure the military was good for you, though," Brad said with mock sympathy. "It probably gave you some structure and discipline that you needed. Even if you never became anything important, at least you learned to follow orders and stay out of trouble." The crowd around them had grown larger, and Sarah realized that her high school reunion had become a public humiliation session, just like old times. She looked around at the faces watching her, some with cruel amusement, others with pity, and a few with embarrassment for what was happening. Sarah made a decision. She would not run away this time like she had done in high school. She would not let these people make her feel small and worthless, but she also would not reveal who she really was, not yet. Sometimes the best response was to let people reveal their true character while maintaining your dignity. "You're right, Brad," she said calmly. "The military did teach me a lot about discipline and following orders. It also taught me about leadership, sacrifice, and what real strength looks like." Brad's smile widened, thinking he had won. He had no idea that the quiet woman standing before him was about to teach him a lesson he would never forget. The reunion dinner continued with Sarah sitting at a table near the back of the room, trying to enjoy her meal while Brad's voice carried across the restaurant. He had moved on from targeting her directly, but she could hear him telling exaggerated stories about his business success and making jokes about people he considered beneath him. Sarah picked at her food, lost in memories of her actual military career. She thought about the day she had graduated from BUD/S training, becoming one of the first women to complete the brutal Navy SEAL program. She remembered the pride in her commanding officer's eyes when she received her trident pin, and the respect she had earned from men who had initially doubted her abilities. "Excuse me, are you Sarah Martinez?" A voice interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see Mrs. Peterson, her old English teacher, standing beside her table with a warm smile. "Mrs. Peterson." Sarah stood up and hugged the elderly woman. "It's so good to see you. You look exactly the same." "Oh, you flatterer," Mrs. Peterson laughed. "I wanted to come over and tell you how proud I am of you. I've been following your career in the military through your mother. She comes into the library sometimes and always has such wonderful things to say about your service." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. Her mother had always been her biggest supporter, even when others doubted her dreams. "Thank you for saying that. Your English classes actually helped me a lot in my career. Writing clear reports and communicating effectively are more important in the military than most people realize." Mrs. Peterson sat down across from her. "I remember you writing essays about wanting to serve your country and protect others. Even then, you had such determination and clarity about your goals. It made me sad to see how some of your classmates treated you for having big dreams." "High school was a long time ago," Sarah said diplomatically, but Mrs. Peterson shook her head. "Some things never change, I'm afraid. I heard that unfortunate display earlier when you arrived. Brad Henderson hasn't grown up much since graduation. He still thinks success is measured by how much money you have and how loudly you can talk about it." Before Sarah could respond, a commotion started near the front of the restaurant. Brad was standing on a chair tapping his wine glass with a fork to get everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brad announced in his booming voice, "I hope everyone is enjoying this reunion as much as I am. It's fascinating to see how people's lives have turned out, especially compared to their high school dreams and predictions." Sarah felt her stomach tighten as Brad's eyes found her across the room. "Some of us set realistic goals and achieved real success," Brad continued. "Others chased impossible fantasies and ended up living ordinary, unremarkable lives. It just goes to show that there's wisdom in listening to people who know better than you do." Mike Roberts raised his glass. "Here's to those of us who knew our place in the world and made something of ourselves," he shouted, clearly having had too much to drink. Lisa Chen giggled and clinked her glass against Mike's. "And here's to learning from other people's mistakes," she added, looking directly at Sarah. Mrs. Peterson reached across the table and squeezed Sarah's hand. "Don't let them get to you, dear. They have no idea who they're talking to." But Sarah was no longer listening to her former teacher. She was watching Brad, who had climbed down from his chair and was walking toward her table with his entourage following behind him. She could see the cruel gleam in his eyes that she remembered so well from high school. "Sarah," Brad said loudly as he approached her table, "I hope you don't mind, but I was just sharing some thoughts about following your dreams versus being realistic about your abilities. I think everyone here learned some valuable lessons about setting appropriate expectations for themselves. Brad, perhaps this isn't the time, Mrs. Peterson said firmly, but he ignored her. Oh, it's the perfect time, Brad insisted. Reunions are all about reflection and honest assessment. Take Sarah here, for example. 20 years ago, she was convinced she was going to be some kind of elite warrior. We tried to help her understand that some dreams are just too big for some people. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through it. I was just showing everyone pictures of my new yacht. It's a 40-foot cabin cruiser that I bought with the profits from my businesses. Real success leaves evidence, you know what I mean? Mike Roberts leaned over Brad's shoulder to look at the phone. Man, that's beautiful. You've really made it, Brad. Not like some people who are still living in fantasy land. The thing is, Brad continued, holding up his phone so others could see the yacht pictures, I've achieved everything I set out to achieve and more. 3 successful businesses, a mansion, this yacht, and a beautiful wife who appreciates a real man who knows how to succeed in the real world. He put his phone away and looked directly at Sarah. Meanwhile, others are still pretending that their mediocre military careers somehow make them special. It's actually kind of sad when you think about it. Sarah felt something shift inside her. She had spent her entire adult life protecting people like Brad. People who lived comfortable lives because warriors like her stood ready to defend them. She had been shot at, had watched friends die, had made decisions that saved innocent lives, and had earned the highest levels of security clearance because her country trusted her with its most important secrets. You know what, Brad? Sarah said, standing up slowly. You're absolutely right about one thing. Real success does leave evidence. Finally, Brad laughed. She's starting to see reason. I knew eventually you would have to admit that your whole military fantasy was just that. A fantasy. Sarah smiled, and something in her expression made Mrs. Peterson sit back in her chair with interest. I think it's time I showed everyone what 20 years in the military actually looks like. Brad's confident grin faltered slightly, but he maintained his mocking tone. What are you going to do, show us your participation trophy? I hate to break it to you, but everyone gets a medal just for showing up in the military these days. Actually, Sarah said, her voice taking on a tone that made several people nearby stop their conversations and turn to listen. I was thinking of something a little more substantial than that. The restaurant had grown quieter as people sensed that something significant was about to happen. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, her movements deliberate and confident. She had been quiet long enough. Brad crossed his arms over his chest, still smirking. This should be good. What are you going to show us, pictures of the cafeteria where you worked for 20 years? Sarah's smile grew wider, and for the first time that evening it reached her eyes. Something like that, she said softly. But first I think everyone should know exactly who they're talking to. Sarah scrolled through her phone with calm precision, while Brad and his friends watched with amusement. The entire restaurant had grown quiet, with conversations stopping at nearby tables as people sensed something important was about to happen. You know, Brad, Sarah said without looking up from her phone, you mentioned that real success leaves evidence. I couldn't agree more. She found what she was looking for and held up her phone so everyone could see the screen. It showed a photograph of her in full military dress uniform, her chest covered with ribbons and medals, standing next to a flag with other uniformed personnel. This was taken last month at the Pentagon, Sarah said clearly, her voice carrying across the now silent restaurant. That's me receiving the Distinguished Service Medal from the Secretary of the Navy. Brad's smirk began to fade as he squinted at the phone screen. Anyone can Photoshop a picture, he said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. Sarah swiped to the next photo. This one showed her in combat gear, standing with a team of soldiers in what was clearly a hostile environment. Her face was painted with camouflage, and she was holding an assault rifle with the easy familiarity of someone who had used it many times. This was taken in Afghanistan during my 3rd deployment, she said matter-of-factly. I was leading a joint special operations task force at the time. The restaurant was completely silent now. Even the waiters had stopped moving as they strained to hear and see what was happening. Mrs. Peterson leaned forward with a knowing smile. Sarah, would you mind telling everyone your current rank and position? Sarah looked at her former teacher with gratitude. I'm Commander Sarah Martinez, United States Navy SEALs. I currently serve as the commanding officer of SEAL Team 7. The silence that followed was deafening. Brad's face had gone pale and his mouth was hanging open slightly. Mike Roberts looked like he had been punched in the stomach, and Lisa Chen had dropped her wine glass, the red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth. "That's impossible," Brad whispered, but his voice cracked as he said it. Sarah swiped to another photo on her phone. This one showed her rappelling from a helicopter over water, clearly in the middle of a training exercise. This was taken during an anti-terrorism drill 6 months ago. We were practicing hostage rescue scenarios. She moved to the next image, which showed her in diving gear underwater, demonstrating advanced combat swimming techniques to other SEALs. And this was during an underwater demolition training course that I was instructing. Brad tried to regain his composure. "Even if those pictures are real, you're probably just pretending to be something you're not. I bet you work in an office and just dress up for photo opportunities." Sarah's expression hardened slightly. She had faced down armed terrorists with more courage than Brad was showing right now. She pulled up another photo, this one showing her shaking hands with a 4-star general while receiving what was clearly a significant commendation. "This was when I received the Silver Star for gallantry in action," she said, her voice steady and professional. "I led a rescue mission that saved 43 hostages from a terrorist compound in Syria. 3 of my team members were wounded during the operation, but we completed the mission with 0 civilian casualties." The crowd around her had grown larger as word spread through the restaurant. People were pulling out their own phones, some taking pictures, others likely searching online to verify her claims. "I don't believe it," Mike Roberts said weakly. "Women can't be Navy SEALs. It's not allowed." "Actually," Mrs. Peterson said with obvious pride, "the military began allowing women into special operations units several years ago. Sarah was among the first to complete the training and certainly the first from our little town." Sarah nodded. "I was the 3rd woman to successfully complete Bud's training and earn the Navy SEAL Trident. It took me 6 months longer than most recruits because the physical standards are exactly the same for men and women. No accommodations, no special treatment." She showed them another photo, this one of her completing what was clearly an extremely challenging obstacle course, covered in mud and pushing herself through razor wire while instructors watched. "This was during Hell Week," she explained. 130 hours of continuous training with a total of 4 hours of sleep. Out of the 212 people who started my Buddhist class, only 18 graduated. I was one of them." Brad sat down heavily in the nearest chair, his face ashen. "But you were so quiet in high school. You never stood up for yourself. You let everyone walk all over you." Sarah looked at him with something that might have been pity. "I was quiet because I was focused. While you were worried about being popular and impressing people with loud talk, I was training my body and my mind for something much more demanding than high school politics." She pulled up a video on her phone and turned it so the crowd could see. It showed her leading a team of SEALs through a complex training scenario, shouting orders and making split-second tactical decisions as simulated explosions went off around them. "This is from a counter-terrorism exercise I planned and executed," she said as the video played. "My team had to neutralize multiple threats while protecting civilian assets. The margin for error in this kind of work is 0. Lisa Chen finally found her voice. "But why didn't you ever tell anyone? Why did you let us think you were nobody special?" Sarah turned off her phone and put it back in her purse. "Because truly confident people don't need to announce their achievements to feel good about themselves. My value isn't determined by whether high school classmates are impressed with me." She looked around at the faces staring at her, some with amazement, others with embarrassment, and a few with something approaching fear. "For the past 20 years, while you've been worried about impressing each other with your possessions and your status in this small town, I've been protecting all of you. Every mission I've completed, every terrorist I've stopped, every hostage I've rescued has been in service of preserving the freedom and safety that allows you to live your comfortable lives." Brad tried one last desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. "Well, that's all very impressive, but at the end of the day, you're still just a government employee. I'm a successful businessman who's created jobs and built wealth. That's real achievement in the real world." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, and several people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. There was something in her eyes now that reminded everyone present that they were looking at someone who had been trained to neutralize threats. "You're right, Brad," she said softly. "You are a successful businessman. You've sold cars and made money. But tell me something. How many lives have you saved? How many times have you put yourself between innocent people and those who would harm them? How many nights have you gone without sleep Because you were standing guard so others could sleep safely. The restaurant was so quiet that people could hear the kitchen staff working in the back. Brad opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Sarah smiled, and this time it was neither warm nor cold. It was the smile of someone who had just made her point perfectly clear. I thought so. The silence in the restaurant stretched on for what felt like minutes. People stood frozen, drinks halfway to their lips, conversations abandoned mid-sentence. Sarah remained standing calmly beside her table, her posture relaxed but alert in a way that spoke of years of tactical training. Finally, someone started clapping. It was Mrs. Peterson, her applause slow and deliberate. Within seconds, others joined in, and soon most of the restaurant was applauding. The sound echoed off the walls, growing louder as more people participated. Brad remained seated, his face red with embarrassment and something that looked like anger. Mike Roberts had backed away slightly, no longer standing close to his friend. Lisa Chen was staring at Sarah as if seeing her for the first time. This is ridiculous, Brad said, standing up abruptly and raising his voice over the applause. So what if she managed to trick the military into thinking she's special? At the end of the day, she's still the same loser who couldn't even stand up for herself in high school. The applause stopped immediately. Several people gasped at Brad's words, and Mrs. Peterson shook her head in disgust. Sarah tilted her head slightly, studying Brad with the kind of analytical gaze she typically reserved for assessing threats. You know what, Brad? You're absolutely right about one thing. I'm the same person I was in high school. She took a step closer to him, and he instinctively stepped backward. I was quiet because I was observing and learning. I was focused because I had goals that mattered more than teenage popularity contests. And I was strong enough to endure your bullying because I knew it was preparing me for much greater challenges. I wasn't bullying you, Brad protested weakly. I was just being honest about your limitations. No, Sarah said firmly. You were a scared teenager who made himself feel important by tearing others down. And apparently you're still that same scared person, just older and with more expensive clothes. She pulled out her phone again and showed him a different photo. This one was taken in what appeared to be a war zone, with destroyed buildings visible in the background. Sarah was treating a wounded soldier while under fire, her concentration complete despite the obvious danger. This picture was taken during a firefight in Iraq, she said. I was providing medical aid to a wounded teammate while our position was under assault. Do you see that look of focus on my face? That's the same expression I had in high school when you were mocking my dreams. Brad tried to interrupt, but Sarah continued. The difference is that now I understand what real strength looks like. It's not about dominating others or making yourself feel superior by putting people down. Real strength is about protecting those who can't protect themselves, even when it means risking your own life. Mike Roberts, clearly uncomfortable with how the evening was going, tried to support his friend. Look, we all said stupid things in high school, but Brad's accomplished a lot in the business world. He's created jobs and contributed to the economy. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. You're absolutely right, Mike. Creating jobs and contributing to the economy are valuable things. I have a lot of respect for people who build businesses and create opportunities for others. Brad looked hopeful for a moment, thinking she was backing down. But that's not what happened here tonight, Sarah continued. What happened here was that Brad saw someone he perceived as weak and decided to attack. He didn't ask about my career or show any interest in what I'd accomplished. He just assumed I had failed and used that assumption to make himself feel superior. She looked around at the crowd that had gathered. How many of you have had experiences like that? How many times have you been judged and dismissed before people even bothered to learn who you really are? Several people nodded, and Sarah could see recognition in their eyes. Everyone had been underestimated at some point in their lives. The military taught me many things, Sarah said, but one of the most important lessons was about leadership. Real leaders don't tear others down to build themselves up. They find ways to help everyone succeed. Brad's face was now bright red. This is insane. You're acting like you're some kind of hero just because you joined the military. Plenty of people serve in the military without turning it into some big dramatic story. Sarah's expression grew serious. You're absolutely right again, Brad. Millions of people have served with honor and distinction. Many of them did things far braver than anything I've ever done. Some of them didn't come home. She paused, letting that sink in. What makes tonight different isn't that I served. What makes it different is that you assumed I had failed at my dreams and used that assumption to humiliate me in front of our former classmates. Lisa Chen stepped forward hesitantly. Sarah, I want to apologize. We had no idea who you had become. If you had known, you would have treated me differently, Sarah finished. But that's exactly the problem, Lisa. You shouldn't need to know someone's rank or achievements to treat them with basic respect. She looked back at Brad, who was clearly struggling to process what was happening. In high school, you made me feel small because I was different. You convinced other people that having big dreams was foolish. How many other kids did you discourage? How many people gave up on their goals because they were afraid of being mocked? I never told anyone to give up on their dreams, Brad protested. You didn't have to say it directly, Mrs. Peterson interjected. Your mockery and ridicule sent a clear message that reaching for something better was dangerous and foolish. Sarah nodded at her former teacher. Mrs. Peterson always encouraged students to think beyond the limitations others placed on them. She understood something that took me years to fully appreciate, that the people who mock your dreams are usually the ones who gave up on their own. She turned back to Brad. Tell me something, Brad. What did you dream of becoming when you were young, before you decided that selling cars was the height of success? What did you really want to do with your life? Brad's mouth opened and closed without any sound coming out. For the first time that evening, he looked genuinely vulnerable. I thought so, Sarah said gently. Somewhere along the way, you convinced yourself that playing it safe and achieving modest success was more important than taking risks and reaching for something extraordinary. And because you made that choice, you needed to believe that anyone who chose differently was foolish. The crowd around them was listening intently now, many people reflecting on their own abandoned dreams and the compromises they had made. But here's what you didn't understand then, and apparently still don't understand now, Sarah continued. Some dreams are worth the risk. Some goals are worth enduring mockery and criticism and doubt. And some people are strong enough to pursue those dreams no matter what others say. She smiled. And this time it was neither cruel nor pitying. It was the smile of someone who had lived her truth and found peace with her choices. I became exactly what I said I would become, Brad. The question is, did you? Brad stared at Sarah for a long moment, his face cycling through emotions. Anger, embarrassment, confusion, and something that might have been regret. The restaurant remained silent except for the quiet sounds from the kitchen and the distant hum of air conditioning. Brad started, then stopped. He looked around at the faces watching him, many of them former classmates who had witnessed his behavior throughout the evening. Some looked disappointed, others sympathetic, but none looked impressed anymore. Sarah waited patiently, neither pressing him nor backing down. Her training had taught her the value of silence, of allowing others to fill the space with their own revelations. I wanted to be a pilot, Brad said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. Commercial airlines. I used to spend hours at the airport when I was a kid, watching planes take off and land. I had my whole life planned out. I was going to learn to fly, get my commercial license, maybe even become a captain for a major airline. The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised everyone else. Mike Roberts looked shocked, clearly having never heard this story before. What happened? Mrs. Peterson asked gently. Brad laughed bitterly. My father happened. He said flying was too risky, too uncertain. Said I needed to focus on something practical, something with guaranteed income. He had just started his first car dealership and wanted me to take over the family business eventually. He looked directly at Sarah for the first time without hostility. So I gave up on flying and started selling cars. And every time I saw someone chasing what seemed like an impossible dream, it reminded me of what I had given up. It was easier to convince myself that they would fail than to face the fact that I had quit before I even tried. The restaurant had become so quiet that people could hear Brad's breathing. Several former classmates were looking at him with new understanding, while others seemed to be reflecting on their own abandoned dreams. I remember now, Mrs. Peterson said softly. You wrote an essay in my class about wanting to fly. It was passionate and detailed. You had researched flight schools and different career paths in aviation. It was one of the best essays I received that year. Brad's eyes filled with tears that he tried to blink away. I kept that essay for years. I finally threw it away when I got married because my wife said it was foolish to hold on to childish fantasies. Sarah sat down at her table and gestured for Brad to join her. After a moment's hesitation, he did. It's not too late, you know, Sarah said quietly. You're what, 38 years old? People change careers at that age all the time. If flying is still something you want to do, there are ways to make it happen. Brad shook his head. I have 3 dealerships, a mortgage on the mansion, 2 kids in private school. I can't just walk away from all that responsibility to chase some childhood dream. I didn't say you had to walk away from everything, Sarah replied. But you could start taking flying lessons. You could explore opportunities in aviation while maintaining your current income. The only thing stopping you is the same fear that stopped you 20 years ago. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to a different photo. This one showed her in civilian clothes, sitting in the cockpit of a small airplane with a huge smile on her face. This was taken last year when I earned my civilian pilot's license, she said. Military training gave me experience with helicopters and some fixed-wing aircraft, but I wanted to learn to fly for pleasure too. It was something I had always wanted to do. Brad stared at the photo. You learned to fly? Even with everything else you've accomplished? Why not? Sarah asked. Just because I achieved my primary goal doesn't mean I should stop learning and growing. Life doesn't end when you reach one dream. It opens up space for new ones. Mike Roberts had been listening quietly, and now he stepped closer to the table. Brad, man, I had no idea you ever wanted to fly. You never mentioned it, not once in all these years. Because I was ashamed, Brad admitted. Every time I saw someone pursuing something difficult or unusual, it reminded me that I had taken the safe path. So I convinced myself that they were being unrealistic, that I was smarter for choosing security over dreams. Lisa Chen had also moved closer, her earlier hostility replaced by genuine curiosity. Sarah, can I ask you something? Weren't you ever scared? I mean, the things you've done sound incredibly dangerous. Sarah nodded. Terrified sometimes. But I learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting in spite of fear. Every mission I went on, every training exercise I completed, every leadership decision I made started with being afraid and choosing to move forward anyway. She looked around at the group that had gathered. Fear is normal. What's not normal is letting fear make all your decisions for you. Mrs. Peterson pulled up a chair and joined the conversation. You know, I've been teaching for 42 years and I've seen this pattern over and over again. The students who mock others for having big dreams are usually the ones who are most afraid of failing at their own. That's exactly what happened, Brad said, his voice gaining strength. When Sarah talked about joining special forces, it reminded me of how I felt when I talked about flying. But instead of supporting her dream, I attacked it because it made me feel bad about giving up on mine. He turned to Sarah. I owe you an apology, not just for tonight, but for high school too. I made your life harder because I was angry at myself for not having your courage. Sarah studied his face for a moment. She had learned to read people accurately, to distinguish between genuine remorse and manipulation. What she saw in Brad's expression was authentic regret. Apology accepted, she said. But the real question is what you're going to do now. Are you going to keep using other people's dreams as mirrors for your own disappointments? Or are you going to start pursuing what you actually want? Brad was quiet for several minutes, thinking. The restaurant had gradually returned to normal noise levels as other conversations resumed. But their small group remained focused on the discussion. I think, Brad said slowly, I need to have some serious conversations with my wife about what I really want out of life. And maybe I need to look into flying lessons. That would be a good start, Sarah agreed. But more importantly, you need to stop tearing others down. The energy you've been spending on criticism and mockery could be redirected toward building something positive. Mike Roberts nodded thoughtfully. You know, I think I've been doing the same thing. I always made fun of people who seemed too ambitious or different because it was easier than admitting I was stuck in a job I hate. What would you rather be doing? Mrs. Peterson asked. Mike looked embarrassed. This is going to sound stupid, but I always wanted to be a teacher. I love working with kids, but I ended up in insurance because it pays better. Sarah smiled. There's nothing stupid about wanting to teach. Mrs. Peterson can tell you that teaching is one of the most important professions in the world. The conversation continued as more former classmates joined the group, many of them admitting to dreams they had abandoned and regrets they carried. What had started as a humiliation session had transformed into something much more meaningful. An honest discussion about courage, fear, and the choices that shape our lives. As the evening wound down, the reunion had taken on a completely different atmosphere. Instead of the usual superficial conversations about material success and social status, people were having deeper discussions about their real hopes, fears, and unfulfilled dreams. Sarah found herself at the center of multiple conversations, not because she was boasting about her achievements, but because people were genuinely curious about how she had maintained her focus and determination over the years. The hardest part wasn't the physical training, she explained to a group that included several former classmates. It was learning to ignore the voices, both external and internal, that told me I wasn't good enough or strong enough or smart enough. Everyone faces those voices. The difference between success and failure is often just refusing to let them win. Jennifer Walsh, who had been quiet and studious in high school, spoke up. I always admired your confidence, even back then. You seemed so sure of yourself, Sarah laughed. I wasn't confident at all. I was terrified most of the time. But I had learned that feeling confident and acting confident are two different things. You can choose to move forward even when you're scared. How do you do that? Asked David Kim, another former classmate. How do you act confident when you don't feel it? Practice, Sarah said simply. Every time you're afraid and you do something anyway, you build evidence for yourself that you can handle difficult situations. Eventually, that evidence becomes stronger than the fear. Brad had been listening quietly, but now he spoke up. Sarah, I have to ask, do you ever regret not having a normal life? Marriage, kids, a house in the suburbs? Sarah considered the question carefully. I don't regret the choices I made, but I also don't think there's only one right way to live. Some people find fulfillment in family life, others in careers, others in creative pursuits. The tragedy isn't in choosing one path over another. It's in not choosing at all. She pulled out her phone one more time and showed them a photo of herself with a group of young military recruits. This was taken last month when I was guest lecturing at the Naval Academy. I was talking to future officers about leadership and service. Seeing their enthusiasm and dedication reminds me why I chose this path. Do you think you'll stay in the military forever? Lisa asked. I'm eligible for retirement in 5 years, Sarah replied. After that, I'm not sure. Maybe I'll teach. Maybe I'll start a business. Maybe I'll write books about leadership and teamwork. The beautiful thing about pursuing your dreams is that achieving them opens up new possibilities you never imagined. Mrs. Peterson smiled. I've been thinking about retirement myself. 42 years of teaching is a good run. But listening to all of you tonight has reminded me why I love what I do. Maybe I'll stick around for a few more years. As people began to leave the restaurant, many stopped by Sarah's table to thank her for the evening's unexpected turn. Some asked for her contact information. Others shared their own stories of dreams deferred or abandoned. Brad approached her as she was gathering her things. Sarah, I know this might sound strange, but would you mind if I stayed in touch? I think I could learn a lot from your perspective. I'd like that, Sarah said, meaning it. And Brad, when you start taking those flying lessons, send me a picture. I'd love to see you in the cockpit. Brad's eyes lit up with something that looked like hope. I'm going to call a flight school on Monday. I can't believe I'm saying that, but I'm actually excited about it. Good, Sarah said. 20 years from now, I want to hear that you're a commercial pilot telling some young person that their dreams are achievable. As Sarah walked to her car, she reflected on the evening's events. She had come to the reunion dreading confrontation, and had ended up having one of the most meaningful conversations of her life. Sometimes the most important battles weren't fought with weapons in foreign countries, they were fought with words and courage in ordinary places like restaurant dining rooms. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her commanding officer, asking about her availability for a mission briefing next week. Sarah smiled as she typed back her confirmation. In 3 days, she would be back in her element, planning operations and leading teams through complex challenges. But tonight had reminded her that heroism came in many forms. Sometimes it was rescuing hostages from terrorists, and sometimes it was helping a former bully rediscover his abandoned dreams. Both required courage, both made the world a better place, and both were worth doing. As she drove away from the reunion, Sarah thought about the young girl she had been 20 years ago, quiet, determined, and absolutely certain that she was destined for something extraordinary. That girl had been right, but not in the way she had expected. The extraordinary thing wasn't just the missions she had completed or the medals she had earned. It was the discovery that her greatest strength wasn't her ability to fight enemies, but her ability to see potential in everyone, even in people who had tried to tear her down. 3 months later, Sarah received an email with a photo attached. It showed Brad Henderson in the cockpit of a small training aircraft, wearing a huge grin and giving a thumbs up to the camera. The subject line read, "First solo flight. Thanks for reminding me that it's never too late to reach for the sky." Sarah printed the photo and put it on her office wall, right next to her commendations and awards. It served as a daily reminder that sometimes the most important mission is helping others discover their own courage. And 6 months after that, she received another email, this one from Mike Roberts, who had just been accepted into a teacher certification program. The message was short. "Started my journey toward the classroom. Turns out it's never too late to follow your dreams. Thank you for showing us what real courage looks like." Sarah leaned back in her chair and smiled. In a career filled with successful missions and important victories, these small transformations felt like some of her greatest accomplishments. She had learned that true leaders don't just complete objectives, they inspire others to become their best selves. Outside her office window, she could see young recruits going through training exercises, pushing themselves beyond what they thought possible. Soon, some of them would face real dangers in service of their country, but they would face those dangers with the confidence that comes from knowing their limits are much further than they imagined. Sarah picked up her phone and scrolled through the photos from the reunion one more time. In the span of a single evening, she had gone from being mocked and dismissed to transforming the lives of the people who had tried to humiliate her. It was a perfect reminder that sometimes the best response to cruelty isn't revenge, it's living so well that you inspire others to do the same. She put her phone away and got back to work, planning the next mission that would take her team into harm's way to protect innocent lives. It was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. And now she knew that her impact extended far beyond the battlefield. It reached into ordinary lives in small towns, encouraging people to reach for extraordinary dreams.